We spoke last week in the build-up about what was needed to get a home semi-final. And I know that Alex talks a lot about you focusing on the process, not the outcome. Because if you're focused on the outcome, you lose sight of what's going on in the process. Do you think subconsciously there was anything going into the game about thinking too much about what was needed to get a home semi-final, and just subconsciously that was maybe a little bit of a distraction in that first half?
It's hard to say, and I suppose you can speculate a little bit afterwards, and everything's easier in retrospect. So I think at the time we felt in preparation, we felt that all the messages were clear and that the team were in a good place and confident going into it. I think statistics would show as well. We had the majority of the ball still. We had the majority of the territory. I just think we were. We were poor on those transitions, and and they were excellent in terms of striking fast when they got the opportunity, and we spiralled a little bit in that first half. So I think it's hard to say from a psychological perspective, because I felt we were in a good place going in. But hopefully, we have that control from the off that we're after on Sunday. We spoke around it last week in terms of not going too far away from our game model and how we play at our best. So we've re-centred around that, and obviously that's underpinned by our effort and our physicality. So I'm hoping to see a big improvement on that on Sunday.
George obviously made his debut last Friday. Firstly, he obviously played the first half and then came off at half-time. Was that exactly what the plan was going into the game, that he'd just play one half, or was there an element of flexibility, a little bit of flexibility going into the game depending on the match situation, or was it something that was kind of pre-prepared and that was exactly what the plan was always going to be?
There were probably some physical markers that the S&C and medical guys had to keep an eye on. The first half was probably a little bit more open than we expected, and a little bit more and there's probably a little bit more high speed running off the back of it, given the number of transitions kind of from attack to defence. So obviously had to make that call, given that he's had the time off that he has, and given kind of how that game went in the first half. I think if it was a little bit more controlled, we were probably a little bit better with our basics, then we may have seen an extra 10 minutes, but sometimes those things happen.
What is therefore the plan going into this week? Is it a case of just building more minutes up, or is it a case of him being rested this week? What's the plan for George going into this weekend?
I think there's, obviously selection will come out later in the week. We've had a really good training week in that respect, in terms of having all the players back who had a little bit of a break last week. There's an element of us balancing, obviously, across the two competitions and having a shorter turnaround next week. So we've only got a 6-day turnaround, and obviously with us being away in Exeter on the Sunday, probably some of that comes into consideration a little bit. But similarly, there's a strong group there that have got us to this stage of the competition, and have earned the opportunity to play in a semi-final. So whatever team kind of goes out on Sunday, we're excited to see what they can do down at Sandy Park, and I know they're ready to embrace that challenge down there.
I was going to ask, how do you balance? It is a balancing act between the guys that have been, the youngsters in particular, and squad players who've been playing in this competition to get us to this stage, versus the kind of senior players who, I suppose, case by case might need minutes just to keep them ticking over. How do you balance rewarding players playing throughout this competition versus the fact that it's a semi-final and it's one win away from a final? Yeah,
it's our Kieran. It's probably an individual basis and what the player needs at this stage of the year. Given that you've had some boys away internationally, given that, and that's probably at under 20 level as well as senior level. And obviously you've had some boys that have come off. We had I think a 9-game block over December and into January. So I think there was some well-earned rest last week and an opportunity for some boys to freshen up, going into what's going to be a massive last half of the season. Obviously kicking it off this weekend with one semi-final, but hopefully there'll be another 2 off the back of that if we get this right in terms of managing the squad appropriately, like you said, but obviously giving boys an opportunity this weekend. First and foremost, those who've got us there, and that'll form the core of the team on Sunday.
In terms of the senior players first team players that were rested last week, considering the really big stretch coming up after, I think it's 3 of the next 4 in the Premiership away, and I think it's the other 3 sides in the top 4 in the Premiership to come. How is it a case of you're just taking it player by player because every player is different as to whether they need minutes this week or whether actually the benefit for them long term is to give them another week off to make sure they're fully ready, fully fresh going into that really big batch coming up, which is a really important phase to cement the top 2 position in the Prem?
I think we're pretty forward looking in that respect in terms of selections and what's required over this last block. Squads aren't massive, throughout the country, so you've got to be pretty forward looking in that respect. So I know Al and Deeks have a good idea looking forward as to what that might look like. And there's a plan around managing the squad appropriately to make sure that we can hit our straps at the right time.
Going back to George, how did you think his first 40 minutes were coming back, considering he'd been out 7.5 months? How did you think those first 40 minutes, from just an individual perspective rather than necessarily the team, how do you think he went in those first 40 minutes in a Sale shirt?
Yeah, there's some things that you're going to get with George, and the first of all, like the quality. Obviously, the first half didn't necessarily go to plan, but quality of his restarts and his kicking out of hands, obviously right up there and world class. So, able to win back a couple of kickoffs. And get some momentum through that. Got a score off the back of that at the end of the first half. Some good touches in there. I think there's obviously an element of him, getting minutes, like you said, and working back to his best. And similarly, it's pretty hard when we couldn't necessarily get ourselves on the front foot and we couldn't look after the ball as well as we usually do in that first 40. So obviously a little bit difficult, but there were some moments in there, and hopefully we'll see more of that over the coming weeks.
With George now having made his return, I've asked Alex probably this a few times about communication with England and with Steve Borthwick. Are you aware of the conversations that have been had in regards when potentially Steve Borthwick might want George to go back in with England, or is that a conversation that will be had once he's got 2-3 games under his belt? I
wouldn't know, if I'm honest, Kieran. I think Al will probably have caught up with Steve at some point regarding all the players who've obviously been in camp there. So he'll probably be the best person to ask next week. So I wouldn't like to speculate and give you the wrong answer, Kieran.
With the 3 guys that have been released, I suppose you're in a bit of a delicate position because it's difficult to know the exact private conversations, but Ben started last week and I thought had a solid game. Didn't have an amazing game, but didn't have a bad game. I thought he was solid. Has been completely discarded from the match day 23 for this week. Obviously, we're not privy to the conversations that have been had in terms of what their plan is, but on the face of it, it seems pretty harsh that Ben has gone from a starting spot to then not being in the matchday squad at all. What would be your view? I know that kind of puts you in a bit of a delicate position, but what would be your view on that?
Hard to comment, really, mate, just because I haven't necessarily been around the environment and haven't been in there day in, day out. So, I know it's really hard to comment in that respect. But we both know Ben's quality, and I'm sure he'll bounce back from that. And similarly, there might be, like we just spoke around with regards to selections, there's probably a little bit of forward planning with that, even at the international level. So, obviously disappointing for those lads, but similarly, I'm confident, and I know we all are really confident in those boys, performing at their best and forcing their way back into that team.
I assume probably the answer will be quite similar, because I asked last week and it was kind of a similar one, that it was Tuesday and then we spoke Wednesday. This week it was Wednesday, this week Thursday, about whether those guys will be involved. So Bevan, Johnny, and Ben. Are those conversations ones like they were happening last Wednesday, happening today in regards whether they will be involved on Sunday? And again, it will be a case of you take it player by player and you just see where their head's at and what's best for each individual rather than a blanket decision for all three of them.
Yeah, to a certain extent, mate. I suppose the difficulty this week as well is that with it being a Sunday game, we've had the vast majority of our preparation already this week. So, those lads have had a couple of tough weeks in camp. So, we'll have to take all those things into consideration. And going into next week, and there being a game against Northampton, there's probably a case of managing those boys between the two, the two camps and the two environments. It's things we've got to really consider going into Sunday, and like you said, you kind of manage it on a case by case basis.
You might not know the answer to this, but in terms of for next week, with it being a bye week in the Six Nations, what is the situation regarding the England players? Will all of the England squad, the 36-man squad, all be unavailable for next weekend's round of matches, or is it a similar situation to what these 2 weeks have been in terms of it being trimmed down at some point?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, if I'm honest. I think, like I said, we've been a fallow week. I think there's some boys, I don't know if there's some players that will have, won't necessarily have had that much game time, may be released. I think that is, going to be a case by case basis that, England staff will have to consider alongside the clubs. So I know those conversations are happening at the minute, going into next week.
Just wanted to ask a bit of an injury update. Firstly, Tom Curry, where is he up to? Because we're sort of at that. I think when Alex, when he first got the injury back in early January, it was about 4 to 6 weeks. Where is he up to in terms of a return to action?
I think rehab's going well. He's been reintegrating into elements of training over the last week, and seems to be going well. I don't think he's far off. Hopefully sooner rather than later he'll be back up for selection, and then obviously I'm sure the England questions will come about with regards to Tom as well as soon as he's back fit and playing. So hopefully not too far off now, and it's been great to have him back in some parts of training this week.
Is that potentially the Northampton game? Because I know that Alex said that with that being the week in between the Italy and Wales games for England, it kind of, if fit, was probably the perfect game to give him some minutes before then going back in with England. Yeah,
I haven't got the medical sheet in front of me, and I've probably had probably been thinking about a couple of different things this week. So I don't think it's far off that, if I'm honest with you. But I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, Kieran.
And just one final injury one. Dan Dupree, is he? I know he pulled his calf muscle a couple of weeks back. What's the latest with where he's at?
Yeah, I think he's cracking on with his rehab at the moment. Hasn't necessarily reintegrated into as much training, but obviously it's a completely different injury. So we'll see how he is over the coming weeks. But it may be a little bit longer.
Just one final one then, going into Sunday, obviously a semi-final. It may not be Premiership semi-final, it may not be a European Champions Cup semi-final, but just kind of give us a gauge of the excitement levels going into that trip down to Stanley Park for a place in the Premiership Rugby Cup final, which obviously the club won a couple of years back during the COVID year. And speak on kind of my behalf, it was great to see us win a trophy. So how much excitement is there? Even if it's not the Premiership, it's still a semi-final, it's still a trophy up for grabs.
100%. There's a brilliant buzz around the place. I know there's lots of lads excited to get the opportunity. There's probably a couple of young lads in there that haven't been involved in anything like this before. So, there's a massive excitement around the group, and hopefully, like I said, it'll be the first of a few this year. But it's been a good buzz around the place. It's been a slightly longer week for us this week. Obviously, we was playing on the Friday night and playing the following Sunday. So, I think all the boys are ready to embrace the challenge this weekend. Going down there, hopefully in front of a packed Sandy Park. It'll be a great experience for us, and I'm hoping that we can put in a brilliant performance off the back of it, and we can rise to the challenge.